When I bought the cabin, I thought I had left the world of rules behind. It sat tucked among towering pines, the kind of place where silence lived in the air and every sunrise felt like it belonged to me alone. The logs were weathered, the roof sagged slightly, but that didn't matter. I wasn't after perfection. I wanted freedom, the kind you can't buy in the city. For the first week, that freedom was real. I stacked firewood in neat rows against the cabin wall, built a small stone ring for evening fires, and mapped out a garden that would one day replace the grocery store trips I'd always hated. Out here, there was no schedule but daylight and no judgment but the whisper of wind through the trees. Then she arrived. Her name was Karen Halverson, though she never introduced herself without adding, head of the HOA board. She showed up unannounced, heels crunching on my gravel path, clipboard pressed to her chest like a badge of office. Her hair was arranged into a rigid helmet, and her smile was polite only on the surface. "Welcome to our community," she said, though her tone was that of a principal greeting a truant student. "We pride ourselves on order. I'm sure you'll find our guidelines easy to follow." Before I could reply, she placed a thick packet in my hands. Fluorescent yellow highlights marked the passages she clearly considered sacred. No visible woodpiles from the road. No sheds or unapproved structures. No landscaping without prior approval. I looked from the papers to the forest around us. "Ma'am," I said carefully, "this is a cabin in the woods, not a suburban development." Her eyes narrowed, though her smile stayed frozen. "Rules are rules. I'm sure you'll come to appreciate them." She left without waiting for agreement, her perfume hanging in the air like smoke. At first, I dismissed her. What power could a homeowners association possibly hold out here, miles from the nearest strip mall? I kept stacking wood. I kept laying the posts for my fence. I built a small shed from reclaimed timber. None of it felt like rebellion. It was simply the life I came here to live. But Karen saw it differently. The first note appeared under my door 3 days later. In tight, angry handwriting, she accused me of yard clutter and warned of escalating consequences. A week after that, another envelope appeared, this one stamped with the HOA's seal. Then came the visit, Karen storming up my porch, clipboard poised like a weapon. "Mr. Dawson," she snapped, savoring the syllables, "you are in violation of multiple regulations. The woodpile, the fence, the shed, each one lowers our property values. This community depends on compliance." I tried reason. "My land deed is older than your subdivision. This cabin existed long before the HOA." She waved a hand, dismissive. "You signed when you purchased. That makes you subject to our authority." With that, she spun on her heel, already punching something into her phone. After she left, I found myself pacing the porch, heat rising in my chest. I hadn't moved here to pick fights, but her presence changed the air itself. Each evening, her SUV prowled past my driveway, headlights cutting through the trees, her silhouette visible behind the wheel as she slowed just enough to watch me. She became less a neighbor and more a shadow, lingering, waiting for me to slip again. Still, I didn't yield. I kept working on my land. Every swing of the axe, every shovel of dirt felt like defiance. I told myself she would tire of the fight, that eventually she would see I wasn't worth the trouble. I was wrong. Karen didn't thrive on peace. She thrived on control. My refusal to bend only sharpened her obsession. The notes grew harsher, the visits more frequent. I caught her photographing my yard from her SUV. At night, I sometimes imagined her eyes gleaming in the dark like a predator's. The breaking point came one humid evening. I was on the porch, wiping sweat from my brow after stacking a final row of logs, when I heard tires screech on gravel. Karen stormed up the drive, face red, voice shrill. "That's it, Mr. Dawson," she shouted, waving her phone like a sword. "I've given you chance after chance, and you refuse to comply. You leave me no choice. I'm calling the authorities." Her fingers stabbed at the screen. The glow of the porch light caught her clenched jaw, her narrowed eyes, her certainty that she had me cornered. In that moment, with the crickets silent and her voice echoing through the trees, I realized something. Karen wasn't bluffing. She was about to bring the full weight of the law into her personal crusade. What she didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this exact moment. And when the time came to show my hand, she would freeze at what I pulled out. The deputy arrived the next afternoon. His cruiser rolled slow down my gravel drive, tires crunching like judgment. I was splitting oak behind the cabin, sweat streaking my shirt, when he stepped out. Young, clean-shaven, mirrored sunglasses hiding his eyes. "Afternoon," he said, one hand on his belt. "We got a call about possible code violations." Behind him, idling at the end of the drive, sat Karen's gleaming SUV. She didn't step out right away, just watched through the windshield, clipboard balanced across the steering wheel. The corners of her mouth tilted upward, confident. I leaned on my axe. "Code violations? Out here?" He cleared his throat. "The complainant said you've built an unauthorized structure and left firewood stacked dangerously close to your residence." I followed his gaze to my shed, sturdy and weatherproof, and my woodpile, covered by a tarp. Out here, those weren't luxuries, they were survival. Karen's door opened. Her heels struck the gravel like gunshots as she approached, smile painted but eyes sharp. "Officer, thank you for coming. As you can see, this man refuses to respect our regulations. His behavior jeopardizes property values and community safety." I wanted to laugh. Safety? From firewood? But Karen's posture radiated triumph. She believed the flashing lights gave her the authority she craved. The deputy shifted uneasily. "Ma'am, this is a civil matter. I can't arrest someone for stacking wood. If it's against HOA bylaws, you'll need to pursue it through legal channels." Her smile cracked. But he's in violation. He's defiant. He's not breaking any laws," the deputy interrupted. "That's where my authority ends." Karen's cheeks flushed crimson. She turned on me, voice low and venomous. "You're making a mistake. This isn't over." She spun, storming back to her SUV, gravel spitting as she peeled away. The deputy gave me a small shrug. "Best of luck," he muttered before leaving. When the dust settled, the silence of the woods felt heavier than usual. I should have felt relief, but instead I felt the tremor of something worse. By dragging law enforcement into this, Karen had crossed a line. If humiliation couldn't stop her, escalation surely would. And escalate she did. The notices multiplied, bold, stamped, and hostile. Failure to comply will result in fines. Unauthorized structure subject to removal. The amounts grew absurd. $200, $500, then $1,000. I tossed each envelope on the counter, a pile of empty threats that nevertheless loomed like storm clouds. Neighbors began to change too. The man who once waved as he jogged past now kept his eyes on the ground. Conversations in town hushed when I entered. Karen's whispers had spread. Troublemaker, rule breaker, threat to the community. Her SUV circled my cabin nightly. Sometimes she parked at the drive entrance, phone raised, documenting every corner of my yard as if she were building a case in some private court. The sense of being watched crept into my bones, turning my sanctuary into something more like a cage. I considered giving in, tearing down the fence posts, moving the woodpile, dismantling the shed. But each time the thought crossed my mind, I remembered her expression when the deputy dismissed her. The gleam in her eye when she thought she'd crushed me. That look demanded defiance. So I didn't yield. I built the fence taller, stacked more wood, and reinforced the shed. Not to provoke her, but to reclaim what was mine. And while my hands worked, my mind searched. Nights stretched long as I combed through dusty deeds, county records, and the HOA's bloated bylaws. If Karen wanted a war of paper, I would arm myself with the one weapon she never expected: knowledge. One rain-soaked evening, buried in legal jargon, I found it. A single clause in an old deed, yellowed with time but crystal clear in its language. The land my cabin stood on, my land, was never annexed into the HOA. Their jurisdiction ended at the tree line. I sat back, heart pounding. Every letter, every fine, every threat, all of it was smoke. Karen had built her crusade on a foundation of sand, but showing her privately wasn't enough. She would deny it, twist it, bury it under fresh accusations. No, if I wanted peace, I had to break her hold publicly, before the board, before the neighbors she ruled through fear. For weeks, I let her believe she was winning. I ignored the growing stack of notices. I stacked more wood within her sight line, daring her to write another complaint. I let her tighten the noose she thought she controlled. And sure enough, the trap closed. One morning, taped to my cabin door, was an official summons from the HOA board. They were calling a meeting, and my fate was the headline, a vote to authorize a lien against my property. The timing was perfect, the setting better. A room full of neighbors, a board drunk on authority, and Karen presiding with her smug smile. Exactly the audience I needed. For months, she'd painted me as the enemy of order. Soon, she would learn the truth. And when I pulled out the document she never expected, she wouldn't just lose her case. She would lose everything. Word count 761. The day of the meeting arrived with a sharp edge in the air. Storm clouds hung low over the mountains, their shadows stretching long across the valley. My cabin stood silent behind me as I dressed. No uniform of war, just worn denim and a flannel shirt, the clothes of a man grounded in his land. But inside my pocket, folded crisp and sealed in a plastic sleeve, rested my true armor, the deed. At the town hall, the parking lot buzzed with more cars than I'd seen all summer. It seemed the entire community had turned out, eager to witness my reckoning. I walked through their whispers, their sidelong glances, their quiet judgments sharpened by Karen's stories. To them, I was the rogue neighbor, the rule breaker, the one dragging property values into the dirt. Inside, the board sat elevated on a dais, their papers stacked, their expressions stiff. At the center of it all sat Karen, immaculate in a navy blazer, pearl earrings gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She smiled when she saw me, a predator's grin polished for public view. "Mr. Harris," she began, voice syrupy sweet, "thank you for joining us this evening. It's important that we resolve these infractions swiftly." Her gaze flicked to the crowd, inviting their nods of agreement. I took my seat at the long wooden table reserved for the defendant. A gavel struck, and the meeting began. The first hour was a parade of grievances. Karen read them aloud with theatrical precision. Unauthorized fencing, unsanctioned shed, unsightly woodpile, and a general disregard for community harmony. Each charge was punctuated with projected photos, snapshots of my yard taken without my knowledge, blown large on the screen. My cabin, my refuge, reduced to evidence in a trial I never agreed to. The audience murmured, some shaking their heads, others scribbling notes. It was clear Karen had done her work. She'd seeded doubt, fear, and resentment long before this night. When she finished, she clasped her hands, as if in prayer. In light of these ongoing violations, she declared, the board must vote to place a lien on Mr. Harris's property. This will ensure compliance and protect our community's integrity. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. A lien meant foreclosure, if unpaid. Karen wasn't just aiming to control my yard. She wanted my home stripped from me. The chairman cleared his throat. "Mr. Harris, do you wish to respond?" I stood slowly, letting the silence stretch. Eyes fixed on me, some hostile, some curious, all waiting. "Yes," I said. "I have something to say." Karen leaned forward, lips curled in anticipation. She expected anger, a rant, maybe a desperate plea. But I offered none of those. Instead, I drew the folded document from my pocket and laid it gently on the table. "This," I said, voice steady, "is my deed. Dated and filed long before this HOA existed." The board members exchanged glances. Karen frowned, momentarily unsettled, but quickly recovered. "That doesn't change the fact you agreed to abide by our rules when you..." "Read it." I cut in, sliding the paper toward them. The chairman adjusted his glasses, scanning the lines. His brows furrowed deeper with each passing second. Finally, he looked up. "According to this, Mr. Harris's property lies outside the association's jurisdiction." The HOA boundary ends at Miller's Creek, not at the ridge line. A hush fell across the room. Karen blinked, confusion flashing behind her practiced mask. That's impossible, she snapped. We've always considered his lot part of the community. Considered, I said, isn't the same as law. You fined me, harassed me, and called the police. All without legal authority. You've overstepped. A ripple of unease spread through the audience. Some neighbors whispered, others leaned closer. For the first time, Karen's control faltered. The chairman set the deed down. Mrs. Langley, he said carefully, if this document is accurate, then the board has no legal standing to enforce regulations on Mr. Harris's property. Karen's face hardened. You can't just let him get away with this. He's been mocking our rules for months. If he isn't punished, what kind of example does that set? Her voice cracked, thin beneath the strain. She wasn't speaking to the board anymore. She was pleading with the crowd, clawing at the authority she felt slipping from her fingers. I met her gaze, calm but unyielding. The example it sets is this. No one can wield power they don't own. Not even you. The gavel struck again. The chairman announced a recess, the board needing time to review the document. The room erupted in chatter, neighbors splitting into hushed factions. Some glanced at me with newfound respect, others with suspicion. But all eyes returned to Karen, whose composure had fractured into visible fury. As the meeting adjourned temporarily, she stormed past me, heels clattering, her perfume sharp as poison. She leaned close, voice low enough for only me to hear. This isn't finished, she hissed. I smiled, slipping the deed back into my pocket. You're right. It's only just begun. The recess stretched into a half hour, each minute heavy with tension. Neighbors clustered in knots, their whispers swelling like a hive. I sat alone at the defendant's table, calm on the surface, but charged with anticipation. This was the moment the tide either turned or drowned me. When the board returned, the room hushed. The chairman adjusted his papers, cleared his throat, and announced, after reviewing Mr. Harris's deed and verifying its boundaries with county records, this board acknowledges that his property lies outside the jurisdiction of the Homeowners Association. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Relief warmed my chest, but I didn't show it. I wanted Karen to feel the silence pressing in, to watch her throne dissolve beneath her. Karen shot to her feet. This is absurd. He attends our community events, uses our roads, benefits from our upkeep. He is part of this HOA whether he likes it or not. Her voice cracked under the strain. Eyes darted toward her, not with support, but with doubt. For months, maybe years, she had ruled unchecked, wielding rules like a cudgel. But now the illusion of her authority was crumbling, and the neighbors she once cowed were watching her unravel. I rose to speak, my tone deliberate. Mrs. Langley is correct about one thing. I do use the roads. I do wave to neighbors. I even volunteered to help clear storm debris last winter. But what she forgets is that community isn't built on fines, threats, or police calls. It's built on respect. And from the moment I moved in, she showed me none. The chairman raised his gavel but paused, letting the words linger. Karen, trembling, jabbed a finger at me. You've mocked me, ignored me, disrespected everything this neighborhood stands for. If you're allowed to do whatever you want, others will follow. Then what happens? Chaos. The chairman finally struck the gavel. Order. His gaze shifted to her, stern and unflinching. Mrs. Langley, your conduct tonight borders on disruptive. The matter is settled. This board has no authority over Mr. Harris. Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth, closed it again, and then sank into her chair like a marionette with its strings cut. The meeting dissolved soon after, neighbors filing out in murmured clusters. Some avoided me, embarrassed by their earlier scorn, while others offered quiet nods of acknowledgement. I didn't need their praise. The victory wasn't in their approval, it was in reclaiming the freedom Karen had tried to steal. Outside, the storm finally broke, rain falling hard against the pavement. I pulled my coat tighter and started toward my truck when I heard her heels behind me. Don't think this makes you untouchable, she hissed, voice ragged. The HOA might not have control, but I still have influence. I turned, rain streaking across my face. Karen, influence only works when people listen. After tonight, I don't think they will. Her glare faltered, the mask slipping to reveal something raw, fear, maybe even shame. For the first time, she seemed small. I left her standing there in the downpour, clutching her blazer, as though it could shield her from a truth too heavy to bear. Back in my cabin, I set the deed on the table and lit the old wood stove. The fire snapped to life, orange glow chasing shadows from the room. It wasn't just heat, it was vindication. For months, I had been treated as a trespasser on my own land, cornered by someone drunk on borrowed power. Tonight, I had pulled out the one thing stronger than her rules, the truth. Karen would still linger, I knew. People like her don't vanish with one defeat. She might whisper, scheme, or find some new stage to strut upon. But she had been unmasked, and the community had seen her for what she was. That damage couldn't be undone. As the storm raged outside, I felt no bitterness, only a hard-earned peace. The cabin was mine, the land was mine, and my freedom was no longer up for debate. And if Karen ever tried to cross my boundary again, I was ready. Not with anger, not with violence, but with the one thing she could never conquer, the truth written in black ink, sealed long before she ever thought she ruled these hills.